Hello, everyone. We're going to give it a few minutes for some other people to log on and we'll get started. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Physician Heal Thyself, 5 strategies to turn your life from survive into thrive. Dr. Jennifer Shaer has prepared a great presentation for you this evening. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. The chat box is open and available for you if you have any responses you'd like to share or any discussions amongst yourselves. If you have a question that arises during the presentation that you would like answered during the Q&A section, please add it to the Q&A box. This presentation is being recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants. If you would like CME credit for attending, you must attend for a full hour. In our follow-up email, there will be a form attached for you to fill out and directions on where to send it for credit. I will now hand it over to Leslie Baker, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Experience Officer of Adjuvant.Health.
Thank you, Lori. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give Dr. Shaer's intro in just a moment, but I'd like to say a few things publicly. First, I'm so looking forward to tonight's webinar and the timeliness of it. Our team just got back this morning from an American Academy of Pediatrics conference, and if I had one conversation with a pediatrician or others, I had 20 on burnout and finding joy in the workplace. So very, very timely. I'm thankful that we have the sense of awareness for our organization and coaching and wellness and mindfulness by having you, Dr. Shaer, and sitting in our physician leadership table. And I'm personally very grateful to work alongside you. Thank you for keeping us aligned with our mission and vision, empowering our staff and offering professional fulfillment to our clinicians for sure, because it's not always easy. And I say all that equally as encouragement to everyone out there. We know it can be overwhelming. So if you're not doing some of the things that Dr. Shaer brings up tonight, I hope you'll pick one thing at least. And if you need any help, we're here for you, because I truly believe we are better together. So we did receive some questions through registration that I know Dr. Shaer is going to address many during her talk, and we'll cover any others at the end as Ari addressed. So it's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Jen Shaer, a pediatrician, the Chief Medical Officer of Allied Physicians Group, and a certified executive and life coach. In addition to general pediatrics, she spends much of her time coaching parents and patients on healthy habits, behavior, mental health, and breastfeeding. Dr. Shaer believes strongly in harnessing the power of the mind to maximize health and well-being, and spends much of her time empowering teens, parents, and fellow physicians to step up and live their best life. Thank you, Dr. Shaer.
Well, Leslie, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for all of you for joining me today. And I want to actually start by asking everyone to sit down and close your eyes. And I'm actually going to turn off my camera for a minute, so I don't distract you. Okay, and sit on a chair with your feet resting comfortably on the floor. Okay, put down your phone and really close your eyes. Even if you're sort of quietly rolling your eyes at me right now, just humor me and go with it for a minute. Now, with your eyes closed, I want you to think about a recent day at work that was really stressful. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed, so many things to do, so many people demanding your attention, not enough time. Drop into the scene and imagine what's happening. Where are you? Notice who's with you, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Really try and picture the details. Now, let go of the thoughts and the scene in your mind and notice instead what you're feeling. Check in with your body. Maybe there's a tightness in your chest or a pit in your stomach, some heat or increased heart rate. Don't judge or try to change anything. Simply notice it and feel it. Now, I want you all to take a big, deep breath. Hold it for a moment at the top and slowly let it go. Let's do that one more time. Deep breath in. Hold it and let it go. Now take 2 fingers on one hand and gently rub them together. And do it delicately enough so that you can feel the fingerprints from one finger on the other finger. Really focus on how that feels. Now shift your attention to your body sitting in the chair. Feel how the seat is supporting your legs, how your feet are resting on the floor, supported by the ground below. Now shift your attention back to your breathing. Don't try to change the breath. Just notice it as it naturally is. Notice what you feel as your breath moves in and out. Maybe it's your chest moving or your abdomen, or maybe the feeling of the air flowing in and out of your nose. Now take one more deep breath. Hold it. Slowly release. And then slowly open your eyes and notice how you feel. Okay. So I'm going to turn my camera back on. Now, thanks for humoring me with that. And I'm sure that many of you have been through exercises like that, but I wanted to make sure that we're all starting on an even playing field. And that was a demonstration of how you can create and interrupt your emotional state just by using your mind and your body. Now, think about this. Whatever crazy, stressful scene you just dropped yourself into, is there someone you know who, when placed in the same scene, might have a different reaction? Or if it's too hard to think about yourself, think about your patients. See if I can. Hold on. There we go. Think about how differently 2 patients can react to the same situation. I see this most often with new moms. One mom is frantic and worried about her new baby's every spit up and gas pain, and another is totally calm and relaxed. Essentially, the same baby, but 2 very different responses. There's no question that we are living in chaotic times. Whatever you want to point at, practicing medicine in the midst of a pandemic, ever-increasing demands from regulators, insurance companies, from patients, you name it. But regardless of the swirling chaos in our environments, some of us just roll with it and stay grounded, focused, and content, and others get swept up in it and spiral. For some of us lucky ones, this ability comes naturally. For others, it's there for the taking, but it requires some work. That's what I want to talk with you about today. Today, I'm going to dig into some specific strategies that will help you improve your well-being regardless of what's going on around you. But before I go on, I want to give 2 caveats. First, severe depression, burnout, and even suicide in physicians is all too common and is incredibly tragic. If you see symptoms like extreme negativity, hopelessness, wide mood swings, or withdrawal in yourself or colleague, and you or they are falling too deeply, please reach out to someone, get professional help. Do what you would tell a patient to do. You can even use the new 988 suicide and crisis line. That level of burnout is very real, but is not the focus of this talk. This presentation is more of a preventive care talk, one that will give you strategies to deal with day-to-day stressors in a way that can help immunize you, in a sense, to the downward spiral that can lead to depression and burnout when practicing medicine in these chaotic times. The second caveat is this. People often criticize the focus on self-care for physicians and point to the system as the problem. Fix the system and we'll all be just fine. Focusing on self-care is like taking a Tylenol when someone is hitting you over the head with a hammer. If you could stop the pounding, you wouldn't need the Tylenol. To that I say yes, and yes. This is a multifaceted issue. We should absolutely demand and fight for the changes that are needed in healthcare. But the wheels of change move slowly, and if we want to continue practicing medicine in this environment, we have to build our resilience. You might be happy to know that the Surgeon General put out a call to action this year to address health worker burnout. The report calls for systemic change and calls on healthcare organizations, insurers, government, tech companies, and accreditation boards, all to remove administrative burdens and barriers with the goal of supporting all healthcare workers. Whether or not this will lead to meaningful change is not really in our day-to-day control. So, since we can't fully move out of the way of the hammer pounding on our heads right now, I prefer to put on a helmet so I can continue to work while the wheels of change slowly lessen the pounding we are receiving. So let's get started. How do you become the person who can stay calm and grounded in the midst of chaos? The first strategy is to be aware of your state at any given moment. So what do I mean and why does this matter? Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, says and describes that between every stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is where our power lies. And in that space lie our thoughts and feelings. That space to me is more like a black box. So many of us are unaware of what's going on in that space. Okay, but why does this matter? I'm going to show you by way of an example that I think we can all relate to. Okay. You're seeing a patient, and as you're closing up the visit, you get the just one more thing question, hand on the doorknob thing. That phrase from the patient becomes your input. It gets processed through your black box of thoughts and feelings. And depending on how it's processed, you automatically and often unconsciously react with one of three typical types of responses. First, you either sit back down and fully engage, giving the patient what he wants, but setting yourself up for disaster the rest of the day, running more and more behind and getting more stressed. Second, you could rudely ask the patient why they didn't bring this up earlier, tell them you don't have time for that now, and just shut it down. Or third option is you can calmly respond and set a kind boundary. You respond with something like, that's a great question. I'd love to dig into it with you. Unfortunately, we're out of time today. Let's set up an appointment for next week and we'll discuss it further. By the way, if this is a frequent problem for you, there are some specific strategies you can use at the beginning of a visit to try and prevent this. And we could talk about that at the end if there's time. But why this matters so much is that whatever response you give becomes the input to the patient's black box, and you've just created a loop. So your outputs are the inputs for your patients, your employees and coworkers, and even your children and spouse. And most of us are completely unaware of how those outputs are created. It reminds me of the Disney movie Inside Out. If you never saw that, it's about a teenage girl who's going through some life changes, but the movie takes the perspective of her inner dialogue. And she has a bunch of these characters which represent her emotions in her head. And the characters, they literally control her actions from a command center. So when joy is at the controls, she behaves differently than when anger is at the control panel. It goes on to show that each person has the same thing going on in their heads and how it causes these interpersonal strifes, particularly between the mother and daughter. To me, it's just a really nice demonstration of what's going on in the black box. So a great example of the interplay of two people's black boxes interacting also is the kid who falls at the playground. The kid falls, he pauses and looks at mom. She receives this event as an input, processes it through her black box, and reacts either calmly or frantically. Then depending on what parental stimulus the child receives, he either gets up and keeps playing, or he cries, and then the child's response comes back to the parent and the cycle is complete. So the first step to improving your well-being is to be aware of what's going on for you in that black box at any given moment. Okay, but how? Okay, I like to use a wellness scale to help improve my awareness. It's similar to a pain scale or a hunger scale when you're trying to lose weight. And as I go through my day, or as you go through your day, you can sort of look at how you're feeling at any given moment. So +10 up at the top is when all is right, feeling great, sort of light and unencumbered. You might be energized or even relaxed and content. There is no feeling of stress up here. You can handle anything. This is where the flow state or being in the zone lives. -10 at the bottom is when you feel heavy and burdened, completely down, overwhelmed. You know, those times when you want to either scream or sort of crawl into fetal position and cry. Now, you don't judge yourself when you're at a low number. The first strategy is just to be aware, to recognize where you are and understand its impact. Where you are has an impact on your actions, an impact on those around you, and it also has an impact on your own physical and emotional health. So here are some details of what's happening on each side of the scale. Up top is where I call the well mode. Essentially up here, you're in a thriver or growth mindset. You can see the big picture and think broadly. This is your challenge mode, and it's governed by a parasympathetic tone. When you take action from here, you are thoughtfully responding. Relationships in this mode are collaborative, productive. You create a positive work culture and connection with patients. On the bottom half of the scale is the unwell mode. Here's where the victim or the fixed mindset lives. Complaining, self-pity, and arguing all come from this state. This zone is governed by a sympathetic tone. It's your fight or flight zone, and it's based on fear. Action from here is typically reactive. It creates a negative work environment. And with patient care, you run the risk of even missing diagnoses because you're stuck in tunnel vision. This is your stress zone. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with -10 in and of itself. When you're down here temporarily, that's our fight, flight, freeze threat response. Super helpful when we face the proverbial bear. Not so much of a help when we're facing our day-to-day stressors. What's meant to happen is that we dip into this zone and bounce back out. Real life example of that would be you're going through the course of your regular day, seeing patients. Suddenly the nurse calls you urgently to check on a patient who started having a seizure. You shift into your sympathetic mode, handle the emergency, come back to baseline. Perfect. Totally normal. Problem is that when that patient is no longer seizing, we are still drowning in smoldering stressors. More patients are now waiting, more phone calls to make, more. Now, when your brain interprets these day-to-day more and more circumstances as a threat, you live in this negative zone, resulting in consequences to your emotional and physical health. I'm not about to lecture a group of doctors on the impacts of persistent sympathetic tone on the body. Suffice it to say that being in a chronic stress state can impact every single organ system. Essentially, our instinctive fight or flight programming is not adapted to our day-to-day modern environment. So it's up to us to actively intervene and hijack the system. There's some fascinating research that shows how it's actually our mindset about stress that causes the physiologic stress response. In the studies, participants who intentionally think of stress as a way to activate them, to get them up and moving, and as a way to enhance their performance, actually show a physiologic challenge response, which mimics the physiology of exercise instead of the inflammatory physiology of the stress response. This mindset shift in the face of a stressor can actually be beneficial to your health instead of detrimental. Essentially, without changing your circumstances, you can shift your physiology just by working with your mind. If you want to learn more about that, just search for Dr. Aaliyah Crum and watch some of her TED Talks. Now, hang on one sec. Okay. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily easy to shift your mindset, but knowing it can have this impact can give us the motivation to do this work. Okay, so how do we hijack our minds? Let's keep going with strategy 1 and looking at my typical day. Okay, so one second, just need a drink. Okay, so here's my typical day when I work. Peek at my awareness, so to speak. I start off the morning pretty neutral. Some days I might actually start off at a +2 or 3 if I've had some time in the morning to have some me time, walk the dog or get some exercise, fill the tank, so to speak, before heading into my day. But as the day goes on, I take a dip. I'm usually lowest at 3 or 4 o'clock if it's a day that I'm working till 5. I start to look forward to going home and slowly rise up in the evening as I recharge my batteries with the family. Now, let's look at what happens during my 3 o'clock dip. Down here, I'm feeling exhausted. I know when I get here, I'm in my survival mode. I'm not thinking as clearly. I'm cranky. For me, when I get like this, I don't have the energy to get into a philosophical discussion about the COVID vaccine or HPV. I'm not proud, but I might be quicker to prescribe an antibiotic to a parent who really wants it. I might even miss a diagnosis because I can't shift into my big picture thinking mindset. And I know this isn't just me because studies support the differentiated care that patients get early or late in the day. It's because we're human. Some people, when they're down here, will get short with staff. I tend more to sort of disengage and retreat into myself. I come across as less friendly with staff and occasionally snap at employee. Bottom line, at 3 o'clock for me, patient care is impacted and so is office culture. So once I'm aware that I'm down in the negative, unwell zone, I shift and move into strategy 2. This is when I pause and I sort of add a bit of air to move me up a notch. It's like pumping air into a tire or blowing out my cobwebs. When I'm at this -4, just before entering the next exam room, I literally pause for 2 seconds. I stop. I take a deep breath. I know it sounds stupid and cliche, but that deep breath physiologically activates your vagus nerve and increases your parasympathetic tone. This is what we practiced at the start of the session together. It's not a miracle cure, but it will allow you to shift slightly and refocus on the moment. For me, this gives me just enough space so that I can be more responsive instead of reactive. In addition, being aware of typical patterns allows me to be proactive. What do I mean by that? I expect that I'm going to have a low point around 3 o'clock. When it happens, I remind myself that this part of the day is hard for me. I give myself a little compassion. I just focus and I keep going as best I can. I intentionally avoid scheduling important things at my low points. And if someone asks me an important question, I tend to respond that I need time to think about it and I will get back to them. I never make decisions when I'm in this state. And after low phase, I plan a recharge. If you don't recharge, your baseline will be lower in the morning and you won't be ready to handle the next day. This can happen when you have stressors after hours or if you don't sleep well. This combination puts you at risk of spiraling deeper into the negative zone, and this is where burnout and depression live. Which brings me to my next point, self-care. Okay. We, as physicians, we are givers. Okay, we are driven by a deep desire to help people. But sometimes the person you need to help is yourself. The proverbial put your own mask on first, or you can't pour from an empty cup. I just took a CPR recertification class, and the instructor reminded us that the most important person at the scene is you. You make sure that you are safe before you go help anyone else. Otherwise, you will have two victims. Now, this can be hard for us to remember and even harder to put into action, but it is critical. You are no good to anyone unless you are good to yourself. But the goal is not to always be happy. Okay, we have emotional fluctuations. That's human, and there's no avoiding it. Okay, nor would we want to. I mean, who wants to be happy when their dog dies? When I talk to patients about this, I sometimes liken it to the weather. It's normal to have sunny days and rainy days, but if you get stuck in a constantly raining El Nino pattern, that's when we have a problem. Okay. So strategy 3 is about control. Take back your control. Now, before you laugh and say, we have no control, let me clarify and say that I'm not just talking about controlling our circumstances, because yes, that is sort of laughable, as we all learned during COVID. Okay. I'm talking about the serenity prayer. Okay. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is your control. So what do we do with this motto? First, change what you can. Instead of complaining and being miserable, develop strategies on how you can improve your office workflows to make your day run more smoothly. This is essentially changing your inputs, and you can do this, okay? Because when you are driven, you can accomplish anything. You didn't get where you are today by feeling like a victim. The trick is that you have to be in your thriver's mindset to get it done. I'm not doing this during my 3 o'clock rut. I find time when I'm in my well mode, and I'll talk with my partners and office manager about how we can improve the check-in process, for example, so that patients get into the room faster to make future days better. That's change what you can. But why is it important to accept the things we cannot change? Because as hard as we try, and we try hard, when we try to change the unchangeable reality, we always fail, and we make ourselves miserable along the way. When my daughter was young, I learned it this way from her preschool teacher. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. It's good advice from Miss Marilyn, her teacher. Accepting reality for what it is will free you from so many negative emotions, but that's easier said than done. Let's look at why and what we can do about it. That brings me to our thoughts. Our brains, okay? Our brains are powerful. Sometimes I wonder if they're a blessing or a curse. They allow us to create and think, but they can also torture us with our swirling thoughts. All you have to do is look at a joyful puppy or even a toddler to understand that ignorance is bliss. I just read a book called The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger. She's another Holocaust survivor who ultimately became a trauma specialist. She talks about how after being freed from Auschwitz for years, she remained a prisoner of her mind. She talks about how she overcame that and then spent her life helping others do the same. She says in the book, I had escaped, but I wasn't yet free. But why is this happening? So I think of it this way. Our brain's job is to think. It generates what are called automatic negative thoughts, thoughts that are intended to keep us safe. No matter what, chatter is going to happen. The brain thinks, just like the lungs breathe and the heart beats. So while you can't stop the chatter, we can decide what to do with it. Just because your brain generates thoughts doesn't mean you have to automatically and unconsciously believe them or get stuck on them. Our thoughts can be painful, but when we get stuck on them, we are adding suffering to the pain. The difference between pain and suffering is sometimes referred to as primary versus secondary pain. Okay, it's the kid with needle phobia. You need a shot, that's the pain. The carrying on and screaming before and after, That's the suffering. And that comes from the child's anxious thoughts about the shot. Can't control pain, but you have the power to control how much you suffer. Although I'm not really sure why the needle is so low on her arm. Maybe this kid does have something to be scared about. In Buddhism, they actually call this the second arrow. They say in life, we can't always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. The second arrow is optional. Or if you like math, you could think about it this way. Pain times resistance equals suffering. So how do we stop from becoming a slave to our automatic thoughts? First, notice that they're happening. Notice that they're automatically generated. Notice how your thoughts are almost always a running dialogue about the past or the future. Think about this question for a minute. When was the last time that your mind and your body were in the same place? If you're like most people, your thoughts are almost always either in the past or the future, while your body can only ever be in the present. Interestingly, most people have a tendency to focus primarily on one or the other, the future or the past. If you're not sure which you are, think about this. When you wake up in the morning and your thoughts start, are you more focused on the day ahead, or are you more thinking about what went wrong yesterday? Looking back, I realize this has been a problem for me for years. My thoughts were always on the future. So much so that I remember specifically once about 25 years ago being on a beach vacation with my husband, but instead of enjoying the beautiful resort, I was completely focused on how many days had already passed and how many more until I had to go home and back to work. My mind was not with me to enjoy the Caribbean paradise. And it's no surprise that doctors are particularly susceptible to this type of thinking. In order to get where we are, we had to have a very forward-focused mind. But now we're here, and if we don't change our thought patterns, we won't enjoy all we've accomplished. Once you have an awareness of your thoughts as automatically generated, and not necessarily you, there are lots of powerful techniques to help with cognitive restructuring. Now, this is the basis of CBT work. But honestly, just the awareness alone will sometimes bring you relief. I find that when I explain this to stressed kids and teens, that they sometimes get it and avoid the downward spiral that can come from too closely identifying with and believing their thoughts. They stop beating themselves up for having the negative thoughts. They let go of the suffering. Some don't need to go to formal CBT training and therapy when they see this. It's like preventive health care for the child's emotional life. Some thoughts are so tightly, some kids though, or some people are so tightly in the grip that they need medications to, loosen it up so they can engage in therapy. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not denying the great benefit of meds in the treatment of anxiety and depression. What I'm saying is, and I always steal a quote from one of my partners, is that pills don't teach skills. This thought work and the formal CBT are the skills. These tools help us look at maladaptive thoughts and help us reframe our thoughts so that they better serve us. They help us look into our black boxes. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, but I do want to touch quickly on two specific strategies. First, recognize that what you focus on grows. This is beautifully illustrated by an old Cherokee fable passed down over the years. The elders teach that we have two wolves battling in our minds. One is darkness and despair, and the other is light and hope. When the child asks which one wins, the elder replies, the one you feed. So while your thoughts will automatically generate, you can learn to actively choose to focus on the thoughts you want to nurture and let go of the ones that are not useful. You could recognize that your brain is instinctively trying to protect you and keep you safe, but you can use your more mature prefrontal cortex to recognize that your primitive brain is misinterpreting your current circumstances as a threat, when in fact there is none. The second strategy is reframing. Reframing allows us to make meaning of our circumstances from a different perspective. There's been a lot of talk about post-traumatic growth since COVID, talking about the good things that have come out of the pandemic. Now, I don't mean to discount the horrors, but reframing allows us to accept that something tragic has happened and to find some meaning despite the tragedy. It's like the rainbow after the storm. And if Holocaust survivors can change their perspective on past trauma, there's hope for us too. But I caution you, don't just try and manipulate your thoughts and feelings without recognizing the messages your feelings are giving you. What do I mean by that? Okay. I'll demonstrate using this medical model that we're all very familiar with. Our feelings are symptoms. Sure, sometimes they're triggered by irrational thoughts, but often they're giving us critical information. In medicine, we don't just treat a symptom. We figure out the cause and then come up with an appropriate treatment plan. We evaluate abdominal pain to rule out appendicitis before giving pain meds. The same could be said of our feelings. I'm not going to tell you to simply treat the feeling of stress with meditation or thought manipulation. Sure, those things will help, just like Tylenol will help the symptoms of fever, but the symptomatic treatment should be used in combination with a root cause analysis or a differential diagnosis. Sometimes we numb our feelings in efforts to push them away and ignore them without knowing what's causing them. When we do this, we're missing good information. For example, if you're stressed because your mind is telling you that you have open charts and too much to do, and you treat that stressful feeling with wine and binge watch Netflix, you'll feel better in the moment, but in the long run, your charts will be even more of a burden and your appendix is going to burst. Now, I have nothing against Netflix and wine, but I also want to come up with a strategy to get my notes done. If, on the other hand, you use some self-care strategies to lessen your symptoms, you can get calm and grounded so you can think clearly from your thriver's mindset and develop the strategy to tackle the charts. Numbing is like putting your head in the sand and is a victim mindset survival strategy. Now for strategy 4. Remember your big why. And this is about reconnecting with your purpose. He who has a why for which to live can handle almost any how. When we feel deep meaning and a strong purpose, we are driven and motivated. I mean, come on, it's how we got here to be doctors. This was no easy path. Think back to when you first became a doctor. How did you feel back then? Why did you do it? Ask yourself, why did you become a doctor? If we reconnect with that purpose, we can do anything. When you're sinking into the unwell mode and feeling victimish, remembering your big why is like a lifeline. Let me show you a model by Dan Diamond, who's a physician who talks about helping people thrive even in difficult times. And in the model he created, he has the purpose and control on the X and Y axis. When we combine purpose and control, we shift into this thriver quadrant and we can accomplish anything. When we lose both, we fall into the victim quadrant. This model, you can understand why we are all so passionate about maintaining control of our schedules and vacations. We don't stay fixed, as he describes, in any one particular quadrant. We move around based on what's happening and, more importantly, based on how we interpret what's happening around us. So in terms of our big why, in one variation or another, I'm willing to bet that we all became doctors because we want to help people. How do you feel when you tap into that? Remind yourself of your big why when you think and feel negatively. It will help you shift back into your thriver mindset. For me, I tend to lose my sense of meaning in my work in the midst of checkup season when it's just one routine checkup after another. I get kind of numb, feel a little unfulfilled. Inevitably, something happens that reconnects me to my purpose. I end up helping someone in a meaningful way, whether it's that I pick up a new diabetic or I connect a family with some community support that they desperately need, or some medical emergency presents itself and I get shocked back into my purpose. I see this with my husband, who's a radiologist. For him, radiology has turned into drinking from a fire hose. Or for those old enough to remember, it's like the I Love Lucy episode with Candy going down the conveyor belt and Lucy and Ethel struggle to keep up with the ever-increasing speed. Radiology just gets faster and more overwhelming, but every once in a while, he picks up a really important finding or connects with the patient behind the film. When I see that happen, I see his light come back on. But you don't have to wait for circumstances to change to remind yourself of your purpose. Those moments are great, but you can call them up on demand as you need them. Like I might get bored running a flu clinic or a COVID clinic, but when I remind myself of the impact I'm having in preventing diseases, I can tap into that deeper meaning on demand. In that way, I can adjust what's happening in my black box without changing the incoming stimulus. But remember, your purpose might be to help others, but you cannot help others unless you first help yourself. This is so important that I'm saying it again. Self-care is not selfish. We are givers and sometimes give too much. Having the characteristics of empathy and caring, those are gifts, but when taken too far, can be liabilities. We have to learn to set loving boundaries and practice self-care. And what happens if your big why changes? Make sure you're on the right path and don't do what you're doing just because you always have. I know you can accomplish anything, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. How do you know? How do you know if your big why has changed? Go back to the medical model and don't ignore your symptoms. Do you feel a sense of unfulfillment? Dread thinking about the day ahead? Look at the thoughts underlying those feelings. Your symptoms of discontent might be from something bigger than frustration with office workflows. So many of us ignore our symptoms, our feelings, and push through, or try to push away or cover up the symptoms. We artificially make ourselves feel like we're at a +10 by eating or drinking or scrolling. But those things just cover up the problem. As soon as the sugar rush wears off, you're right back where you started. When we numb our senses and ignore what they are trying to tell us, it's like holding your hand on a flame. Instead of recognizing the signal and pulling your hand away, we're holding it there, dulling the pain with our vice of choice and telling ourselves to suck it up and deal. It's no wonder we do this. We've been trained to push through our whole lives. But when we do this, our hand is going to burn and our life is going to feel unfulfilled. Change is scary and hard, especially when we've been on this straight path for such a long time. Our brains want us to stay safe in the cave, and when we try to venture out, it starts screaming at us to go back in. Don't be afraid of this. Expect it. If anyone can do hard things, it's people like us. Now, I'm not telling everyone to stop being a doctor. I can't think of a better career filled with meaning and purpose. We are so lucky to do what we do, but be true to yourself. What do you want? What do you need? Sometimes it's just a small adjustment we need. Sometimes a total overhaul. Whatever it is, do it. Yes, there's pain with change, but don't discount the pain that comes with staying still, doing what you don't want to do. Sometimes it helps to take a step back and look at the big picture. This is a view of the Milky Way, actually, from my backyard. My son took it with the regular iPhone, amazingly. When you gaze into space, it's impossible to not notice how small and insignificant we are, and what a small part we play in the big picture of the universe. Everything we do matters, and I'm all for trying to be our best, truest selves with the life we're given. And at the same time, when you think about the vastness of time and space, we're truly just a blip on the radar. With that perspective, nothing really matters that much. I don't mean that to sound depressing, but rather to release you a bit from your stress. Enjoy the ride we call life. Engage fully, but don't take it so seriously. Think about yourself in the future as you near your ending days. That's when everyone seems to have their greatest insight. So don't wait till then. Imagine it now. What does your future self feel most proud of as you look back? Do that today so your future self won't have regrets. And now for a final strategy about building resilience. What do I mean by building resilience? Okay, this is my now 15-year-old son imitating me meditating. Though I don't sit on the floor and chant while I meditate, I'm pretty certain he was making fun of me right then. In any case, I guess I've been meditating since at least that time. So meditation and other mindfulness practices help you create new neural pathways so you can handle the natural fluctuations of life much more fluidly. At the beginning of the session, I gave you a glimpse of a few different meditative strategies that can activate these neural pathways. Regular meditation is literally exercise for the brain. And just like regular exercise, when you practice meditation, you are building your resilience muscles so that they are there when you need them. It's saying that neurons that fire together wire together, and this helps with that. Here's what happens when you start a regular meditation practice. Meditation shifts your baseline up. Nothing happens to your typical day. The stimulus inputs remain the same, but when your baseline shifts, the lows don't automatically trigger you anymore. Building your resilience muscles is like adding salt to a pot of water to raise its boiling point. It improves your window of tolerance and allows you to live and act from your thriver's mindset. If you haven't started a mindfulness practice, I highly encourage it. It's as critical to well-being as is a healthy diet, exercise, and a good night's sleep. If you're interested and don't know where to start, or you've tried and failed, feel free to reach out to me. I can help you find something that works. There's so many different ways to do it. And to close, I will leave you with these final words. Take one step at a time. This isn't a race. See where you are, where you want to go, and make one small change today. Recognize when your thoughts are beating you up and give yourself some empathy. Treat yourself as kindly as you would treat a friend. And remember, life is a journey, not a destination. Thank you. I hope you've taken at least one thing, and please don't hesitate to connect if you want to ask any questions or dig deeper. I'm really, truly happy to connect with anyone.
Thank you, Dr. Shaer. We did have a couple of questions, if you felt like answering tonight, that we received ahead of time. Wondering whether the topic is rearing its ugly head secondary to the universal pandemic, or if that is just another bump in the road toward burnout, which I think you spoke to a little bit.
Yeah, but I think actually, to me, the way I look at it is that I think that the pandemic really sort of made us more aware that this is a problem. Being resilient, and this is actually, the pandemic has allowed us to recognize both sides of the problem, right? The system needs to change. There is a lot that is broken in the system, and it's sort of raised awareness around that. Since we can't control that piece of it, I mean, great, get politically active and join committees and do stuff on that. God, please. We could use all the smart people doing that. But it also has pointed out the need to build your resilience. And so it's a two-pronged approach, and the pandemic definitely rose the awareness on both sides of that.
I'm wondering if you have any ideas on how to cope 36 hours of patient contact time, 4 hours for administrative time, and still trying to make time for your own family.
Yeah, I mean, that is so many people's typical experience, right? And what I say to that is, first change what you can, right? So if you're working 36 hours and that feels like too much for you, you don't just do thought work to try to be happy when you're at work for 36 hours. If you only want to work 25, talk to your boss, see what's possible, see if you could create something that gives you a little bit more freedom. if there's not that flexibility, then you have a choice. Then you're stuck. That's my situation. What am I going to do? Am I either going to find another job that gives me a better work-life balance, or am I going to work on some sort of mindset stuff so that when I'm at work, and when I'm at home, I'm at home, and schedule in. I mean, there are strategies for using your time and your calendar and ways to actually schedule in time for your family, because work and responsibilities and the unimportant stuff is going to creep in. And if you don't carve out time for what's most important to you, you'll never find time for it. So put it in your schedule and focus on it and prioritize it.
Awesome. I think that you've covered most of these questions. They all had a similar theme, and I think your talk really addressed a lot of it. So if nobody has anything else, I think we're good. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me. And I hope things get better for all of us soon.
Thank you, everyone. I will be including, Dr. Shaer had mentioned a few books and TED Talks and things like that. I'll reach out to her for those links so we can include them in the follow-up email for anyone who's interested.
Great.
Everyone have a great night.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.